Hello.
Very nice to have you as a guest.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
First time I ever heard about you or saw you, it was years ago when I was studying body mind centering on my own
Mm.
through Embodied Anatomy DVDs.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I remember, I think it was the endocrine DVD,
Mm-hmm.
and I just saw you then, and you were talking about the folding of the pancreas, embryological folding of the pancreas. And for me, it was mind blowing. It was like the first encounter ever with embryology, with the formation of the organs, and even the idea that we can embody that and go through these processes as adults was mind blowing.
Mm-hmm.
So, could you please take us on a little journey for a beginning? Um, how did you become a movement teacher? What was it that sparked your curiosity to explore movement on a deeper level? And what was it inside of you that gave you the feeling this is important?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I started out as a little tiny child, a little tiny kid wanting to be a ballet dancer. I wanted to be a dancer,
Hmm.
but I would didn't I like I'm not tall and thin and don't look like a ballet dancer. So I took dance classes, but I and then I moved on and took other kinds of classes growing up. I grew up in a pretty small city in Nebraska, in the middle of the country in the Midwest. And my dad was involved with a opera company and theater. So I was around, so I came at it through the arts. I when I went to so I studied ballet and then modern dance and went to college and studied philosophy and theater, double majored in philosophy and theater, and did a combined kind of thesis project on contextuality in theater and how important that is. So so I could say more about that. But then I moved back home to Omaha and was making theater with a little tiny theater company there called the Blue Barn Theater. And I was also teaching dance. It, and but the kind of dance I was teaching, like I was teaching a little bit of Limon, a little bit of Horton, like a little bit of all these different styles. And um, and I got a job teaching dance at a little tiny college in rural Nebraska. And I went there and like we taught in the gym, and these were kids who were like just getting their gym credit and they wanted to do some dance. They were not aiming to become professional dancers. And I realized that I didn't really have the skills to talk about movement. I had the skills to talk about a dance technique, but I was like, how is this relevant to people who want to, like, they didn't want to, it was their physical education credit, right? So they didn't want to play a sport, but they weren't necessarily like, I want to learn to perform ballet or a style of. So I had this question about movement in general, which I'd never had before that. I just had been like, oh, well, you dance and you do these different styles. And around the same time, in my memory, I was, we were creating a show at the Blue Barn Theater about Frida Kahlo. And in that show, it was a collaborative company. And the group of us making this piece had decided we had someone who was writing and I was directing it. We had one of the actors playing Frida Kahlo. But then Frida also had and wrote about a kind of dream self or an imaginary other self. I don't know, imaginary, but an other self who was a dancer and able to do all these movements that Frida Kahlo couldn't do because she'd been injured young. And
Mm,
so we had in the theater piece an actor and a dancer that I knew from my dance teaching. And I was trying as a director to to work with both of them, and I didn't have the right language for it. I had dance language to talk to my dancer friend, and the actor, because I'd studied to do this, I had like acting language to talk to the actor. But when we were trying to create movement, I realized I didn't have any movement language. And I joke about it and I say, when I worked with the actor and I would say, would you just try this movement? She would say, I need to know why I'm doing it. And when I would talk to the dancer and say, can you go for this feeling? She's like, just tell me what to do. I don't need to know why. And
mhm,
I'm really oversimplifying the two positions, but I found myself not having language for talking outside of a style or outside of a technique to people about movement. And I thought there must be more to this than that. So this experience of teaching college age kids who didn't, I didn't think my job really was to teach them a dance technique. And then also this experience making this theater piece, I was like, there's got to be some language for talking about movement, which is different than technical
mm,
jargon. So I moved to New York to study something called Laban Movement Analysis. And that material that was exactly what I was looking for at the time. And it was language for talking about movement in a more kind of analytical way and maybe a more abstract way and less technique oriented. So you talked about what body part is moving, where it's moving in space, what movement quality it has, and kind of what dynamic quality it has or what relationship to the environment. And so learning all of that language was really um, was really valuable for me because it helped me find ways to describe things without evaluating them. In the sense that I could say, this person is moving with quickness and directness in a forward high direction with their arm without saying they're angry or they're moving well or that they're moving poorly or like all of the judgment, like the
mm,
Laban language is set up to be able to describe something without judging it. Now, of course, it's not that neutral because me describing it, I'm making choices already filtered through my own perception. But it was getting closer to being what I was interested in. Um, and it has this illusion of being objective, that as an observer, I can describe what I see and be impartial. And that's a part I think is not true. I don't think we can be objective because we're
mm,
all embedded in our own context as well. Um, but it was useful in that way to kind of start talking about movement. And part of that work then was also looking at the developmental aspect of movement and how we learn to move. And Irmgard Bartenieff's work, which was a part of that training in New York, which is called the Bartenieff Fundamentals, was about looking at really simple movements as a building block for all kinds of other and more complex movements. So I was really interested in that aspect of it, like, oh, what are the building blocks? Again, not as a technique to become necessarily a better dancer, but to doing any kind of movement. And in the course of doing this, of moving to New York and studying this, I also had shifted from dancing to doing yoga
mm,
because when I got to New York, I was like, I'm going to take all these dance classes, but I'm not hardcore enough to dance as a dancer. I'm probably hardcore in other ways, but I just didn't have the whatever to um to try to be a dancer in New York. Like it's just intense and it wasn't like I couldn't hack it. And the classes it was just hard for me and looking in the mirror and learning all this analysis material from the Laban work, and then I would be in a dance class, and all I would be doing is looking at what I was doing wrong, and I wasn't tall enough, and I wasn't the right shape, and all these things. So I stopped taking dance classes and started going to yoga classes, which I will say can also be very judgmental and competitive and
Right.
challenging, right? Hardcore. But for me, it was a respite from what I had been doing to myself. And I got very interested in the philosophy of yoga and really as the idea of movement as a practice rather than on the way to a performance event. That really captured me. Um, which I've expanded my thinking since then. And I think dance can be a practice, also contemplative dance for sure. But
Mhm.
my experience of dance to that point had been very performative, very on the way to a performance. And I had always been like, I love to rehearse, and I'll only, I would dance for people. I would be in a piece because I wanted to rehearse. And when it got to the performance part, I was like, I don't like performing. I didn't want to do it, but you have to do it if you, right, agree to do it for someone. Um, so I found myself kind of getting this language around movement from the Laban program and shifting into a world where there was in the yoga world a little more engagement with the process and the practice rather than the result and the performance. Um, and then I began teaching on the Laban program. I graduated from that and assisted, and then got hired to teach on that program, and just found it really, really engaging to meet lots of different people. Lots of dancers come to the Laban program, but people came from other kind of movement practices as well. And the idea of having language to talk about movement that took away the judgment or attempted to take away the judgment was really, really it's something I've been interested in all over and over in everything I study. So, as part of that, I then went to study a little bit of BMC. I did a BMC and yoga workshop because Bonnie was just starting to do this interlacing of BMC and yoga.
Mhm.
So I took a workshop with her, and then the BMC training had just reorganized itself in such a way that I could go and do courses on some of the material, but not all the material. So I wanted to study the developmental work because I was really interested in kind of how to bring that back to my teaching at the Laban Institute in terms of the basic what were the BNPs, the basic neurocellular patterns and the
Mhm.
reflexes and all of that. So I studied BMC to teach it at Laban, but I did a little bit and then I did a little bit more. And then I was like, well, I'm going to do a little bit more and I'm going to do a little bit more. And as I was taking the BMC courses in the summer in Massachusetts, and Bonnie at the same time was running these monthly BMC and yoga workshops. It was kind of the first incarnation of this series of workshops, so it became a whole program. But so I was studying Bonnie on the yoga workshops, and then also studying with other teachers in the summer, and got certified as a somatic movement educator, and then over 4 years, and found that, and then went on and did the practitioner program and other things. But I found that the body mind centering material for me was a really great complement to the Laban material because where the Laban is very focused on observing from the outside and describing what someone else is doing, the BMC material for me was more about an inner experience. And when you go in and dive into your fluids or your organs or whatever the materials are, like what is your experience about? And I found that for me, the Laban experience could get a little kind of performative and dry in the sense of I'm going to show you something.
Mhm.
And the BMC experience for me took me, I don't think Laban has to be that way. It's how it was showing up for me, right? And the BMC balanced that out with these inner experiences that you might not even see from the outside what
Mhm.
I was doing. And to have an opportunity to like lie on the floor and roll around and not demonstrate to anybody what I was doing, that was really, really profound. And then I found the relationship between them to be able to kind of have an inner experience, but have the tools to express it and to help other people see what I was doing. Um, I found the back and forth between them really, really fruitful. And the teachers that I had in the BMC training, the ones that I found most accessible were the ones who had this Laban training. There was a lot of back and forth between
Connection.
the Laban training and the BMC training. Lots of people had both of them. Um, and I think they made really, anyway, yeah, they made a really kind of coherent whole. So, and that just deepened my interest in movement as a practice rather than as a performance. And yeah, and then I went on from that to into the teaching that I'm doing now. But
Hmm.
that was the beginning of it. Yeah. Those
Nice.
are the two threads that kind of came together, the Laban and the BMC, to bring in the practice idea.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm very interested in this difference between moving as a performance and moving from within
Yeah.
without really focusing on how it looks, but just following the inner impulse.
Hmm. Hmm.
And related to that story of Frida Kahlo that you said, how she imagined herself as a dancer, I feel that by doing that, she kind of like created this aspect of herself that is more free,
Hmm.
more expressive in a way. So, how would you say that all these practices and movements influenced your own feeling of freedom? And did it help you to tap into your own inner creativity, inner
Hmm.
expression
Hmm.
coming out at the moment without being a performance for somebody?
Hmm. I think that was a long process for me coming to that, um, because I was I came into this work really intent on kind of learning everything and being good, being mastering all the material, and um, have have a long running um, kind of mental pattern, mental habit of feeling that that I need to be useful in the world. So being good at things and being useful is so for me that when I'm trying to think about what freedom means to me, and freedom to me means like not trying to meet other people's needs and not trying to demonstrate my usefulness. And creativity then comes out of like investing in what I'm really interested in rather than trying to suss out what the room needs or what the people needs are. I mean, and meeting needs certainly has served my skills as a teacher because that's a lot of what I do is try to anticipate what a room needs or take a guess. But I think that one of the things that has moved that feeling of freedom forward is really understanding or like more than understanding, but comprehending or taking in on all the different levels how significantly different each person's experience is
Mm.
and how that there is no normal.
Mhm.
There's no one person who's normal or who's right. And this also then came out of studying anatomy and studying a lot of anatomy and doing cadaver dissections and then teaching anatomy and recognizing that these things we hold up as like an ideal or neutral, a neutral stance or like they don't exist. Nobody does this. And nobody has a normal body, and nobody's development is follows this linear pathway that we learn. And that's also come out of working with babies. Like part of what I did was the IDME work, which is Infant Developmental Movement and Education. And I did that training and then started working with babies in New York and created a nonprofit with another IDME. But over about 15 years, I saw more than 1,000 babies. And some of them I only saw once, but because I was in New York, I got to see a lot of babies. And none of these babies followed the step-by-step trajectory that we learn in BMC is the sequence of developmental movement, right? They
Mhm.
do pieces of it and the principles are there, but again, I came into that work with like, how do I help every baby have the perfect developmental experience? And I realized like they're most of the time they're fine and they don't need me.
Mhm.
The parents need support usually, and the babies maybe need a little help, but they're going to figure it out. If babies didn't get any help, they would figure it out. I haven't met a baby who doesn't end up walking,
Mhm.
who's in the like well baby spectrum that doesn't have a physical or neurological issue. So that idea that there's some ideal to get to and that I could help people achieve this ideal or help babies, or if I did this enough, I would be perfect, or I did whatever all of that is, it just everything I've observed and been engaged with like dismantles that. And the yoga practice of like adapt the yoga to the individual. Don't make the body match the asana. There is no perfect asana. There's me doing this asana right now, right? So all of that tradition of Desikachar's teaching, that adaptability, that's like that dismantled my like if I work hard enough, I will look like the perfect warrior too. What?
Mhm.
It's crazy. It's like when I think about it, it's philosophically unsound. There's no platonic ideal of a perfect asana out there. Like there's me doing my practice, there's you doing your practice. There's so all of those things just keep coming together to dismantle the idea that there's a perfect to get to.
Mhm.
And that I find really freeing.
Yeah.
And that frees me up to do what I'm interested in doing and to it's a real foundation for me as a teacher to say, like, I don't know everything, but here's the stuff I know and I'm really excited about. And if you want to engage with me in that, then let's see what happens. No promises, I don't know. I can't promise anything. I don't know what your experience will be, but here's what, here's me showing up as a person being excited about this. So I think it's made me freer to not be an expert, but also to show up as myself
Mhm.
and 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 then if we don't click, we just don't click. Like it doesn't mean, and if you don't like the way I teach, it doesn't mean that I'm a bad teacher. It means my teaching doesn't match with someone else's needs. And that's okay. So to me, there's a freedom in that around I don't have to get to some outside ideal.
Mhm.
Instead, what I have to do is see what it is I want to do and do that as well as I can. So it's kind of an integrity question instead. Like, am I doing what I set out to do? And if I am, and someone doesn't like it, that's okay. Anyway, and that feels very free to me, freeing,
Mhm.
and then allows for maybe creativity. I don't think of it as creativity, but I think that's what I would call creativity if I were going to call it that.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel it is in a way creativity because it gives us a choice.
True. Yeah, it does.
Gives us a choice, and it gives us an opportunity to free ourselves from the other point of view, which is very much I feel present still in society.
Oh, yeah.
That we need to conform to different ideals, what is perfect,
Hmm.
and how one's life should look, and the society very much tries to structure things into
Yeah.
perfect little boxes, and then as at the moment where you are not trying to fit into it, you are kind of being looked upon like what is
Hmm.
wrong with you.
Hmm. Hmm.
For me it's very interesting how this worldview even penetrated the very aspects of life which should free us from it, like the body practices and yoga and creative
Hmm.
arts, which should be
Hmm.
liberating from all these boxes. But then
Hmm.
again, some people choose to even practice these things as limiting in a way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really insidious. It's really sneaky. Like yes,
Mhm.
that's my experience also, that it shows up where I don't think it should show up.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, it sneaks up
Mm-hmm.
because you have like a false idea that you're doing something good for yourself,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but at the same time you are really playing the same game but in a different ballpark, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a big revelation for me in, like I said, when I came into the body mind centering work, I still had this idea that I could master it somehow or be perfect at it. And I can remember, unfortunately, and in a really kind of insidious way, it being like, well, this is what it looks like when you've embodied your nervous system, or this is what it looks like when you are being fluid, or this is what it looks like. And so it kind of became performative and really it took me a long time to be like, that's not how it looks in me. That's not, and to then start to question what we're talking about when we say embodied or when we use embodied in that way.
Hmm.
And or hearing someone say like, oh, well, they haven't embodied that yet. I'm like, how can we possibly tell who has embodied something or or judge, assess? How can I assess someone's embodiment? And then working with babies, a student asked me once, like, well, are babies embodied? And I was like, how could they not be? But
Hmm.
they're not consciously cultivating certain qualities of movement. So it makes me curious if there's some other words for some of what we're doing when we're bringing our consciousness to some of these things, which I think is valuable, but
Right.
I don't know, babies make me question embodiment. Not quite, just question putting it outside ourselves as a goal. Like I want to get embodied as opposed to, I think more and more that we are embodied and
Mhm.
we might have created some obstacles to our experience of our embodiment, but to talk about it as something to achieve.
Right. It also
Yeah.
becomes an achievement and a goal set in the future that we have to kind of attain.
Yeah.
Yeah, and related to your work with babies and caregivers, you created the Babies Project, right, with
Hmm.
Sarah Barnaby. And I read a beautiful sentence on your website describing your work where you say that babies are already born as whole, right?
Yeah.
That is related to what we are talking now. So, what would you say is the greatest lesson you learned from babies?
Mm. There's what I've already said, which is that like the perfect theoretical trajectory, none of them do, and they all figure it out. In that sense, they've really helped me get clear about this idea that the map is not the territory, or this is how I think of it, and that the construct is not the experience. Like the map is useful, um, but it's not going to tell me about my actual experience. So, and which is something I talk a lot about in when I'm introducing any of this material, BMC or developmental work, or that the ideas we articulate about it, they're not the same as your experience. And so that in a teaching way, but the other thing that I feel like I personally like I wasn't have been enriched by in working with babies is that they don't I don't know what they care about really, but my feeling is that they don't care about how articulate I am, and they don't care about how well I can describe something. They care about if I show up in that moment to them.
Mm.
And so what I have learned about showing up to a baby while still being articulate with the caregivers, because the caregivers do care if I'm articulate, but the babies, they, I have to show up and be available and be with them and be in relationship. So there's some relational thing that I feel like I've learned and learned to, like a space that I've learned to be in and show up in that I think has made me a better kind of everything, a better human being, a better teacher.
So another sentence I read on your website was the following one. Our hope is that babies of all ages can learn to move through the world led by their curiosity, supported by their comfort, and empowered by a sense of their own agency. So that would be like the basic principles of your work.
Mhm.
Could you expand a
Mhm.
little bit on these four elements: movement, curiosity, comfort, and agency?
Mhm. Well, one piece is that one piece of it is it comes from a body mind centering little um, way of framing what an infant's needs are, which is that survival is necessary for a sense of comfort, and comfort and survival are necessary for bonding, and survival, comfort, and bonding are necessary for curiosity. So that's the way it's laid out in the materials. Um, and what we've done is kind of taken that and taken survival and now we talk about it in terms of safety and really a subjective sense of safety because Sarah and I made these shifts as we were trying to develop this material and survival sounds really stark, like life or death, but we believe that a baby and really all of us have have these very subjective experiences of safety, like do I feel safe? Do I not feel safe? And in a way, survival that isn't really like, am I going to fall off the cliff or is the ceiling going to fall on me? But when I walk into this room of people, are they going to like me? And and that is a kind of survival question. But so we talk about that as safety and the subjective experience of safety. And as a foundation, safety, now we also talk some about orientation, like do I know I'm going to survive? Do I kind of know where I am? All of that's in this idea of safety that we talk about as a foundation for being able to get comfortable. And comfort as not something that sometimes when I talk a lot about comfort, people are like, oh, but then we get lazy or all we do is sit around on the couch. And I, I've never met a lazy baby. I've met a baby who doesn't move. But I start from the premise that if a baby isn't moving, it's because they don't feel safe, not because they're lazy. Babies aren't lazy. It doesn't. And then I extrapolate that into adults that if someone's not moving or not engaging in the world, it's it's either because they're in some cycle of going inwards in relationship to going outwards, but a kind of chronic disengagement isn't because they're lazy. It's a safety thing or a orientation thing. So safety underlies comfort. Comfort underlies, in BMC, we say bonding, which is a little bit of a specialized word. And so we talk more about relationships and being in relationship with others. Um, but, and we kind of allied over that in that sentence, but that safety and comfort contribute to curiosity. And that I find really fascinating the idea that, if I'm comfortable, curiosity will arise. And that's certainly different than what I grew up with as a premise, which was almost the inverse of it, which is that you have to work really hard to even earn a place on the planet. And if we shift the whole premise to we have a right to be here, like I am a human being with a place on the planet, do I feel safe? Do I feel comfortable enough to be curious from that place of security instead of like, I have to earn my place, which I think is a very, um, comes from a lot of traditions. This, like, we're not good enough. We come in with original sin. We have to earn our place, all of that. Like, if we take that off the table, then it's a whole different question. And um, so, safety, comfort, curiosity, if we make curiosity the goal, to me, it just changes the whole constellation, the whole potential experience. And then in talking about um, this word agency, which doesn't come out of the BMC material for us, though I think it's implied in ways, really came out of Sarah and I talking about like brainstorming words around if a baby doesn't have like, how do we talk about babies coming in as whole beings, but yet they can't walk and talk and make a petition to have what they want for dinner or whatever, right? So they don't, but they do have some kind of choice making and some kind of engagement that they come in with. And that is developed and expanded by the perceptual process of learning in the first kind of years of life and having sensory input and then processing that, making meaning of it, and all of that learning happens. But we were looking for a word for what that is that a baby comes in with, um, like intentionality or something, and agency is the word for that. That they have they're developing skills to execute that agency, but our idea is that they come in with that readiness to want something or to have an experience of the world and to make choices. And the parameters for those choices early on are very rudimentary because they haven't had a lot of experiences yet to develop. We don't really talk about babies liking something or not liking something. We try to talk about things as what's familiar and what's unfamiliar, but they are the building blocks of liking something and not liking something. And they're all like if we think about those movement skills that they're learning and the sensory perceptual processes they're engaging in, all of this, like in sensing and motoring, all of those experiences as in support of curiosity and agency, instead of the idea that a baby is a blank slate. It's a very old idea, but it's pervasive again, that like they're blank and they don't feel pain and they don't, and so we have to put all of this on them or they have to build their sense of self. And we like to start from a place where they have a sense of self and they're using they're learning skills they're having experiences to expand that sense of self and their agency. So well, for both Sarah and I, a lot of thought went into trying to articulate these things and trying to really reframe the foundation, like to curiosity and safety and comfort and curiosity and agency instead of they need to be taught and they need to earn their spot and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, beautiful. In a way, you are creating a language and also the mind behind the language.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's so important to have it on both levels.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a bit about working with adults and what is the benefit of revisiting developmental movement patterns at an older age?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that so I've said that babies will figure out how to move. Most babies do just fine. They figure it out. We don't need to go through, in one way, we don't need to go through all the patterns. And um, like babies figure out how to walk. But there is also, there is also a case to be made for the layering of these patterns and pathways um, into a set of choices that gives us a lot of different ways to respond to the environment. And I'm pulling in here from the Laban work as well. And Irmgard Bartenieff's her book is called Coping with the Environment. So there's a focus there on how do I respond to the world in activities of daily life? Do I have the tools to respond to the environment? And it also comes out of descriptions I've heard from my yoga teachers around can I be responsive to the world? Can I use my yoga practice to come into relationship with the world in a way where I can be responsive to what's in the present moment rather than reactive and dragging the past forward and things like that. So so in the if the goal is to be able to be responsive to the present moment, if we say that as a goal for the moment, then the environment can offer so many different things to me or can present me with so many different things to respond to that it, in theory, the more choices I have about how I respond, the better, right? And if I'm really limited in my choices, if I only respond with anger, or if I only respond with directness and strength, or if I only respond with like the flow and indirectness, if I always get out of the way, like those are often our habitual choices are really useful in some situations, but they're not useful in every situation, right? Or if I always step forward with my right leg, like a whole bunch of the time, it doesn't matter. I can always lead with my right leg, but it's some moment I'm going to be facing some way and the like traffic is going to be here. I'm going to have to go left. And if I can't go left, if I have to like turn to go, it's going to potentially at worst be dangerous, but at most just be a waste of energy. I mean, at best, be a waste of energy or just kind of inefficient. And I do think that most of us develop some habits of movement that serve us well in the moment that we develop them. Movement, thought, emotion, like I said, movement, but habits of being that include all of those that that serve us well in the moment, but might not meet all the different things we're asked to respond to. So I feel that revisiting developmental movement in a way that lets me say, like, okay, do I have this pathway from my head to my tail and my tail to my head? Do I have a spinal? Is that available to me? And can I both push and can I reach? Can I yield and push? Can I reach and pull? Do I have access to those relational aspects of my head and my tail and the connectivity between them? And can my hands relate to each other? Can they relate to the world? Can they be, and I can go through all of the BNPs, all of those vertebrate patterns and be like, can all of my limbs relate to my spine and my spine relate to my limbs to each other and then also myself to the world, which is this yield, push, reach, pull relational cycle? Do I have available within me a response that is like a sponge or like a starfish? Do I have access to cellular these what are the pre-vertebrate patterns, right? And then even on into all the body systems, can I feel what it would be like to move from my organs or from my fluids? And what I what I think is powerful about that is that it lets me meet my habits and make some different choices. And in a really concrete movement way, um, to examine some habits about like right, left. Do I always lead with my right side? Do I always lead with my left side? Or do I have rotation available in my spine? Do I have flexion and extension available? What's the balance of tone in the front and back of my body? That I can use the BNPs, the developmental patterns, as a um, form for examining these relationships in my body. And it, it's a way that I think form is really useful, as in a formal kind of exploration, because if I go through all of the developmental patterns, they ask me to have all of these different relationships. Can my right hand relate to my left hand? Can my right hand relate to my head? Can my right hand relate to my tail? Can my right hand relate to my right foot? Can my right hand relate to my left foot? And if it has, chances are one of those relations is a little murky or a little like not so clear. And so if I spend some time cultivating that relationship, then I have one more choice available to me. And I'll probably still have my habits. Like, I don't think we should get rid of our habits, but that we could have some more choices. Like, we still have my go-to. This is how I tend to respond. This is how this is where my emotional resting state is. But can I kind of increase the range of choices around what's habitual? I think increases my sense of safety and increases my sense of comfort, increases my ability to receive support and bond, which sets me up to be curious in a different way. And in that way, the, that's why we talk about babies of all ages, because what we're talking about with babies really applies to all of us. 54-year-old babies, 75-year-old babies, 13-year-old babies.
Yeah, because we all
And
have that babies inside
yeah,
inside of
and we
us.
all were babies and we all developed some patterns really early. And I think that you asked this before, I didn't answer the part of the question about movement, but what what Sarah and I spend a lot of time talking about with babies, but I think it's true of adults as well, is that movement experiences are, for a baby, their first learning experiences also. So movement and learning are really strongly tied together in a baby. And movement continues to be a possible way to learn. We can learn a lot of different ways. And as adults, we have some more choices about how we learn or gather information or gather experiences. But movement continues to be really a fundamental one, I think.
I also feel all of this awakens us to a view of a human being as a process,
Yes. Yes.
that we are not fixed entities, but really a process, a constant change and constant transformation,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that time is not in a way linear. We can go back and
Mm-hmm.
realize something and experience something which was maybe supposed to be part of our childhood, but it wasn't. But we
Mm-hmm.
experienced it now on a completely different level
Mm-hmm.
as adults, and it gives
Mm-hmm.
us the same experience, which enriches us in a way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like it's part of well, it's a relational aspect, but it's also part of taking away the like fixed ideal that there's a right way to do something. There's also a fixedness about there's like somewhere to get to and then you'll be finished. And like there's no thing to get to and then we'll be finished. And the more I learn, the more knowledge there is about cells and tissues and like this process of regeneration and relationships. And it's like I'm never done growing until I die. Like when I'm done being alive, then I'm finished growing, but I don't really finish
Mhm.
um, changing.
Right.
The adaptability doesn't stop until it all stops, right? And then even then, in a bigger picture, it goes on.
Yeah. And to connect that with another important aspect of your work, yoga,
Hmm.
I see the same connection as when we look at asana.
Yeah.
We can look at it as a really fixed form or
Hmm.
as a process.
Hmm. Yeah.
What is your experience with these two different worldviews in the practice
Hmm.
of yoga and in general
Hmm.
in our image of life?
Yeah. Well, when I first moved to New York, I went and I took all these different yoga classes because where I came from, there wasn't a lot of choice about different styles of yoga. But went to New York and I went to these, it would take a couple of weeks of classes in one place or another. And at the time, they were very separate and they were very like, this is the only way to do this. This is the only right way to do yoga, right? And they were like, your feet have to be 3.5 feet apart, or your feet have to be 4 feet apart, or your feet have to be your elbow distance apart, or your wrist. And they were so determined that that was the only right way to do it. And I find that certainty alluring in a way. And as a younger person, it was really kind of captivating. I was like, oh, good, I can do it right. There's a right way to do it. And if I work hard enough, I can do it right. And then I will be good enough. And then blah, 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 all that garbage. Um, but it was in such contrast that like you could go 3 blocks and someone else would be absolutely certain that the opposite was true, or not even the opposite, but a 6 inches difference, right? And that kind of thing was really just kind of amusing to me to look at how certain people were. And all the things I was learning were that bodies respond differently to different things. And there is no one shape that, like, architecturally will work for everybody or will elicit a feeling of joy in every person. So, along with a physical uh, uh, dogmatism, there was also often a psychological, like, if you do this, you will feel happiness. And I was like,
Big promises.
big promises, yeah,
Yeah.
and certainty. Like if you do this, you'll feel this, and if you do this, it will make you depressed. And I was like,
Mhm.
is not this is not true. Not like it's not my experience. And I was finding that they always say forward bends are calming and back bends are stimulating, but one of the things I found in my BMC training was that after a day of studying BMC, what I wanted to do was a lot of back bends to calm down. And
Mhm.
I think it was in relationship to what I'd done during the day, right? The thing that helped me recuperate. And it wasn't really to calm down, but to feel balanced. Like I needed something big and intense in a way,
Mhm.
and kind of very motor. Anyway, back bends were my practice for a couple of years of my BMC training studenting. So I found that the certainty about what experience someone would have was really problematic. To say, if you do this, you will experience this, and um, had and and found really that I could use all of my Bartenieff skills and Laban training and BMC training to help adapt things to people to suit the individual, and that in that tradition of when I would work privately with people, um, to help them have, like, what experience are you looking for? Let's see which thing or which combination of things helps you have the experience you need. And I found that I let go of all of the things that I'd been taught as like foundational. So like you always start with an exhale. So I've been taught that you always start with an exhale, and an exhale is calming and it gets all of the old stuff out so that you could do an inhale. And so that's what I started with for everybody for a long time in their breathing practices. And then I had a client who every time we did that, she would get really um she'd tighten up and she would get anxious looking. And I said, what's happening? This is supposed to be calming, I said to her, which was a terrible thing to say. And she said, every time I think about exhaling, every time I focus on exhaling, I think that that's what I'm going to do when I die. I'm going to exhale. And dying to me is not peaceful. It's really anxiety producing. So this whole thing is making me anxious. And I was like, okay,
Yeah, makes it.
your it makes total sense. And her experience right there, it didn't matter what I thought it was supposed to do. What mattered is that focusing on the exhale wasn't helping her feel less anxious. So I had to adapt what I was doing to match her needs, which didn't match what I'd been told. So I found myself just throwing out. I mean, I still have starting places, like here's where I start. But as soon as someone says, this is my experience, I'm like, all right, well, let's try this then or throw this out. So I feel like in that way, there's there's no perfect asana practice for someone besides what we can generate through our relationship, right? With I have some subject matter expertise. I like to think of it that way, like that, use that word, that I know all the stuff about anatomy and I know all the stuff about movement and all the stuff about asana and then but the person knows their experience.
Right.
So together, we need to bring those together and have some kind of relationship where I can share and they can share and we can craft something that will serve them in their needs.
Mhm.
So I think in that way, to meet an individual, I can turn all my skills to do that. I do also think there's something really interesting about an asana practice that focuses on form, like I practiced Iyengar for a long time, not because it was right, but because it was like a puzzle to play with, right? Could I fit myself into this way of doing things? Could I, did I have the skills to meet the demands of doing asana in the way they asked for it? Or for a long time, I did a Ashtanga practice, and I found that really useful as a way, as a daily practice to meet myself in. So there's this outer thing that I do the same thing every day, and
Mhm.
I get to see how I am in relationship to the form. So for some people, that's really useful. For me, that was really useful. And because my days often include a lot of experimentation and a lot of like, what about this? And what about this? And like all of that responsiveness and experimentation is also really tiring. It's demanding and it's tiring. So I'm very happy to get on my mat and be like, I don't have to think about what comes next. I do 5 sun salutations. Now, how I do them and how I feel in them, it changes every day. But this is the practice I do. And I heard someone say once that her teacher had said to her, which I thought was great, it doesn't actually matter what practice you do, but pick something and do it.
Right.
And I think that that's an interesting idea. If the conversation goes back to talking about practice, pick something,
Mhm.
anything, and do it because the doing of it over and over is where I meet myself day to day
Right.
and I see how something changes. And if I keep changing, then I might not I might not notice what's changing or what's different. But that's also, if you want to practice, if that idea engages you, then pick something and do it every day for a while.
Mhm.
But maybe that's not the kind of practice everybody needs. And in a
Right.
bigger sense, I think like practice comfort, practice curiosity, practice feeling safe, which might mean a new movement
Mhm.
choice every day,
Mhm.
and process and growth and all those things.
Mm. Yeah, and I feel you were able to enter all these practices, even though they are very structured and formal, but you had enough self awareness and deep knowledge of movement to
Hmm.
really make these practices again your own.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes.
The problem appears when an inexperienced person is crossing their own limits in a way
Yes.
by
Yes.
trying to fit into what's supposed to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. And I also have, like, I can cheat and I can look like I'm doing what the teacher said and not do it, like not cross my limits, but I can, yes, I completely agree. And so I feel like part of the problem with that is also that people engage in the form because they think doing that form will fix them. Like
Exactly.
if I master the primary series in Ashtanga, I will balance my nervous system. And
Mhm.
I'm like, no, maybe, but maybe not.
Mhm.
Doing a practice might balance your nervous system, and it might be that the primary series does that for you. But for some people, primary series will completely disrupt their nervous system.
Right.
And certainly, if I engage in it as a life or death, if I don't do this right, I'm a bad person, that's going to disrupt my nervous system.
Right. And this whole thing also calls for a evaluation of the whole teaching process.
Absolutely.
Like,
Hmm.
how do we include the students and what are the levels and how much
Hmm.
do we really take into account the individual needs
Yeah.
opposed to just blindly teaching a system because we were taught like that.
Yes. Yes. I think it involves some I would wish for some changes for teachers around like we could be experts in asana or BMC or whatever, but we're not experts in our students' experiences, right? And so can we find that relational place of meeting where the students have some agency in their learning? But I think if we're talking about that, we also have to acknowledge that students need to change. Studenting needs to change. How to be a student needs to change
Mhm.
because we're also, I believe, trained as students in certainly in most American educational systems, in a in our medical system, we're trained to give up our agency to an expert
Right.
and to say, okay, doctor, you tell me. Okay, teacher, you tell me if I'm good enough.
Mm.
Okay, outside person, tell me if I'm good enough. And guru,
Mhm.
priest, what like it's insidious and it's all over where we give up our agency to the expert. And so there's also some project for how can we help people as students have more agency about saying that doesn't work for me. I'm not having the experience you're describing. Here's the experience I am having. Because I also have students who come in and they're like, well, what am I supposed to feel? I'm
Right.
like, oh, I don't know how, I can't, I won't answer the question and they don't have any other question to ask. So we can't talk to each other until, then I ask questions back. I'm like, well, where do you feel it? Do you feel it in your bones? Does it feel like skin? Does it feel like, and so
Mhm.
how can we change the whole educational model? Really? Can we change the whole culture and then we're back to babies so that there's more respect for our agency, maybe not our expertise. Someone might have more expertise about asana or pharmaceuticals or how to fix a car or how to spell a word or something, but it doesn't have to take away someone's agency around their own experience.
Right.
Yeah. But so being a student needs to change and being a teacher, like both of those models we need to
Yeah.
change. But it's a huge amount of pressure on teachers, I think. I mean, the teacher trainings I've taught in where people are like, okay, so I have to know how to heal. I'm
Mm.
supposed to heal these things for people. And I'm like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
We can't, that's not our responsibility and it's dangerous.
Exactly.
And I think it takes away from the value of practice to say, oh, do this asana and it'll fix your dot, dot, dot.
Mhm.
It's like, no, let's do a practice and see what your experience is. And I'll accompany you in that. Like as a teacher, I
Mhm.
will accompany, I will lead, I will facilitate, I will guide, but I can't fix you.
Right. So in a way, a road to healing is that part when we take responsibility for our own
Hmm.
state
Yeah.
and to
Yeah.
start admitting that maybe we don't feel
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then little by little start feeling more and more and
Mm-hmm.
taking responsibility for our experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then asking for help, but also being able to say, like, no, thank you, that doesn't help. Like
Mhm.
I think that we're not responsible. We're, like you said, we're responsible for our own experience. And from there, then I can move back into relationship with other people and be like, can, as there's something about the difference between like codependence and interdependence, right? Can I have a sense of myself and then be in relationship, be interdependent with the people around me because I believe we need relationships
Right.
to thrive. We can't do it all by ourselves, but we do have to have a sense of ourselves
Mhm.
also and not just give myself up to
Yeah.
the relationships I'm in.
And being okay with saying I don't know, I don't feel, I need help, and
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
instead of having this feeling of performance and I have to do it right.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wouldn't that be a nice world?
we are we are building it.
We're building it one baby at a time,
Yeah.
one human at a time.
Yeah. So I would often wonder about what is the birthplace of asana.
Mm,
And when I started the BMC training and when I first started exploring the BMPs and reflexes and all these early embryological states, I felt like I came to a place which is the birthplace of asana.
mm,
That somehow, from tuning into these processes,
mm-hmm,
which are part of us, a spontaneous movement arises from within, which started forming all these forms that for me look like asana. So in my
mm-hmm,
mind, I imagined this as being a place where asanas were born with some human being just tuning into the power of life so strongly that these movements started arising. And then later on, somebody tried to copy that, and somehow it became codified. It became a system.
mm-hmm.
What would you say? Do you see this connection between embryological movement and asanas as a form emerging?
Well, maybe, maybe. I hesitate. I think that like if we take asana in its meaning of like movement that well not the strict classical meaning, but like a set of movements that might orient us to ourselves, something like that. Um, I think that it's probably came out of each person's context. So what I'm thinking about is that I feel like it's very hard to tell because I've had this conversation with other BMC people who've done yoga who are like, "Oh, embryology, the movement of embryology brings me into asana." And I'm a little curious about like asana is in me an imprint. Like I've done it so much that that's what I move into when I feel the urge to move. And so are you moving into asana because that's what the embryology creates, or because that's the stream, that's the channel available for the energy of embryology to manifest itself? And so I don't want to say no because I don't really know, but I think there's something kind of more personal about what we have available as expressive channels, and that I do I do get that studying embryology or any of this, but embryology for a lot of us brings up this like impulse to move. And I do also think that the movements of embryology have, like, because they are the movements of how we grew our form, They are they are particular to our human bodies. They're not unique to our human bodies, right? Because some of the embryological processes other mammals go through, but those movements of wrapping and spiraling and like they are in our tissues as an experienced pathway. So that's why I say maybe, like, yes, but I also think there's a variety of forms. Like someone else might say, it's Qigong,
Right,
it's Tai Chi, it's contemplative dance, it's
right.
contact improv, so
I love that. Yeah.
but I do think there's probably something that happened about wherever asana began as being some form of expression of an inner experience of energy or life channeling itself maybe into nature, animals, the environment,
Hmm.
finding that and somewhere it got turned into a form in a way that inner impulse got set aside.
Hmm.
And so I'm not sure that's the origin of asana for everybody, but I'm completely on board with it being the origin of asana for you, you know.
Yeah, now when I listen to you speak, and this is also related to my final question, it's not really about asana, it's about this spirilic movement
Absolutely.
that arises.
Hmm.
And that was my question. My last question is I saw that you have a logo for embodied asana, which is a spiral.
Yeah.
For me, this form was always very special. And when I started exploring my own expression of movements, I would notice these spirals
Hmm.
emerge. So, my question is, what does this symbol mean for you? And I see it as a symbol of this organic movement, which kind
Hmm.
of brings us back in connection to nature
Hmm.
and harmonizes us
Hmm.
through this sacred geometry, really.
Hmm.
So, can you
Hmm.
speak a little bit about the spiral and what is sacred geometry for you in through organic movement?
Sure. Oh, great. Thank you for letting me talk about this.
Yeah, take all
Um,
the time. I'm gonna sit back and relax, get out the
um,
popcorns.
so there is something about basically about spirals, like spirals in our bones, spiraling in our movement, that brings in that if we go with the idea that for something to be a spiral, something has to move in two directions,
Mm,
like one way and the other way to create a spiralic pathway. And I feel like that brings in a three-dimensionality, even within what might be a one-dimensional or two-dimensional movement. So I might be doing something that looks very planar, but within it, knowing that my bone spiral, my fluid spiral, like all of my tissues, because they come from fluids, and fluids move in three dimensions, fluids don't move in straight lines,
mhm,
that there's this inner experience of movement in three dimensions, even if I'm in stillness or moving in like a straight line or a plane. So in a simple way, that to me, particularly in this question of form, if I'm doing something that's like I'm trying to be flat or I'm trying to be at a right angle, like the inner experience of it is still three dimensional. The spiral that I use in my logo is it brings another piece in along with that dimensionality because it's a logarithmic spiral,
it's the
which means
golden ratio.
it's the golden ratio. Yeah. And so in a logarithmic spiral, which is built on this golden ratio or the number phi. Um, each each chamber and the model is is a chambered nautilus, is a spiral shell with all these chambers, and the particular quality of that is that it um, each chamber in the shell gets bigger. Like if you start from the inside, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but in this proportional way where it keeps the proportions, but it just becomes larger. And so the relationship could continue infinitely out, and it actually could continue infinitely in.
Mhm.
So this is the idea that the the relationship can stay the same, but the area can keep shifting in such a way that it could travel infinitely out or infinitely in. Like that's a very particular set of relationships, which is this golden ratio.
Mhm.
Not every relationship will do it. So doubling it won't do it because eventually you'll hit zero when you have things going in or going out. Things can always get infinitely larger, but keeping the same proportions as they get larger or smaller is really particular to this spiral. And that infinite movement in and infinite movement out, like and something about the relationship staying the same, but the size of it changing, to me is really profound about the ongoingness of something. And that I can I think of it now as that like I can keep asking a question and I can have a different experience. Like the question can stay the same, but the experience of the question keeps shifting. Um, And there's something I really appreciate about some kind of constancy. So in this case, that the proportions stay the same, but that all these other things can also change. So there's something about constancy and change to me in that spiral, um, a- as well as it being attributed to the proportions of a human body.
Mhm.
That part, I'm a little like I don't know. I don't know how to reconcile that with no body has perfect proportions. So I don't actually think the human body holds the golden ratio in the way that I really wish were true. I really wish that were true. Um but I do think we see it also. We see those numbers in like how petals grow on a tree
Mhm.
or I mean on a flower and the thing where it's mathematically maximizing exposure to the sun and something like that, that there's a kind of rhythmic relationship to nature that allows for growth.
Mhm.
Again, the relational aspect of it, I find really enticing. Enticing's too light, really captivating.
Captivate. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, and this infinite going inwards and infinite going outwards.
Mm-hmm.
It's also like I don't know, something that fills me with awe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Amy.
You are welcome. You are
Yeah,
very welcome.
this was a beautiful conversation, and I really enjoyed um your sharing. Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, it was really a pleasure. I enjoyed your questions and I really enjoy getting to talk about this stuff. So, a pleasure.